Welcome to the Atheist Witch Podcast, a bi-weekly podcast for witches or any curious minds to learn more about a non-theistic approach to witchcraft. Welcome to episode 24 of the Atheist Witch Podcast, a bi-weekly podcast for curious, science-minded witches who are building their own path in this incredible world. I'm your host, and today we're talking about a topic that many witches eventually grapple with: solitary versus community witchcraft. This is a big one. It's about connection or lack thereof and how we choose to wield our personal power alongside others. It's a theme that runs deep in the history of the craft, and it's evolving rapidly in our modern world, especially with the internet connecting us all. Whether you're a total lone wolf or if you crave a circle of fellow practitioners, figuring out your community dynamic is a core piece of building a fulfilling practice. As usual, I like to start with a little personal context on the topic. As you all know, my practice has evolved considerably over my lifetime. I've done the whole spectrum. I've been a solitary practitioner, I've been part of a coven, I spent time practicing structured Wicca, and eventually I settled into my current eclectic, green, skeptical, atheistic path. When I was a young woman in my coven years, the structure and shared experience were invaluable. We had rites, prescribed ways of doing things, and the collective energy for a ritual was palpable. It's one way to raise the power when you're starting out. There's a profound sense of validation and energy that comes from working shoulder to shoulder with other dedicated witches. I remember one specific summer solstice ritual. We were outside, the sun was setting, and the rhythm of the chanting and drumming created this incredible flow state with the group. Everyone felt it, and it was a shared emotional peak that, even to this day, I'll credit with solidifying a major life decision that I'd been struggling with. It was powerful, regardless of whether you call it magic or mass psychology. But eventually, that structure began to feel restrictive, and as my beliefs shifted further into atheism and naturalism, I spent a good period of my life developing my solo practice, experimenting and learning entirely on my own. The solitary path has really forced me to rely on my own inner power and create rituals that resonate with my worldview. I remember the very first new moon that I celebrated entirely alone, lighting one single candle in my kitchen and writing down my intentions. There wasn't a communal buzz, no shared excitement, but that deep, quiet focus was a different kind of intensity. It was this feeling of knowing that the success or failure of my practice rested entirely on my self-discipline and my own focused will. Now, I'm somewhere in the middle. I primarily practice alone. I find joy in my personal rituals and observations of the wheel of the year, but I also cherish the supportive communities that I've found online and the occasions when I share my magic with others. It's about embracing what serves your growth at any given moment. Let's be honest, for many atheistic and science-minded witches, the solitary path feels like the only option, especially if the local groups are heavily deity-focused. But there are impactful reasons that you could choose to work alone even if you could find a group. First and foremost, the freedom to define your own practice is unparalleled. As an atheist witch, being solitary allows you to completely strip away any tradition or dogma that relies on supernatural belief. You choose your own correspondences, your own rituals, and your own tenets, just like my own branches of the tree. You don't have to translate your beliefs for anyone, or feel like you're faking it when the group invokes a god or a spirit that you just don't believe exists. Secondly, the deep dive into personal power and self-knowledge. When you don't have a high priestess or a coven or a deity that provides that oomph for your spell and ritual, you're forced to locate and cultivate that power entirely within yourself. This leads to profound shadow work and a grounded sense of self-agency. This is where psychology comes in. Solitary practice is an intensive course in self-hypnosis, focus, and manifestation through purely cognitive process. For the atheistic witch, your own book of shadows becomes a practical psychology journal. And instead of relying on external deities, solitary practice forces you to master internal techniques. You're programming your own subconscious mind with sensory-rich detail to create your inner. And third, there's just the sheer logistics and discretion of solo work. Life gets busy. Having to schedule your magic around the full moons and everyone else's calendar is, frankly, a massive headache. Solitary practice means that your altar can be in your messy spare room, your rituals can be 10 minutes long, and you don't have to worry about who might overhear your chanting. You have total privacy, which is invaluable for deep and personal work. When you work alone, every object that you use can be imbued with your personal significance, because it's not backed by a group consensus or an inherited tradition. A knife used in a solitary circle isn't a magical athame. It's a symbolic tool of intentional severance, used to mentally cut ties with negative habits. Or the rock that you picked up on a hike isn't a crystal with inherent supernatural power. It's a grounding anchor and a physical reminder of the planet's immense stability, which you can touch during meditation to trigger a pre-programmed state of calm. This practice of assigning deep, personal, secular meaning to ordinary objects elevates your mundane environment. It's self-programmed magic, accessible 24/7 to the solo practitioner. Okay, so practicing as a solitary clearly has its perks. Why would a witch choose a coven? Despite the many benefits of working alone, community offers some unique strengths. As I mentioned, group rituals, especially for major points on the wheel, like a Beltane bonfire or a maypole, can be incredibly high energy and inspiring. Shared space and intention can create a massive and potent focus for your magic. From a skeptical standpoint, the power that you feel in a group is a result of mass psychological conditioning and that collective flow state. When you're synchronized with others through chanting or drumming or meditating together, your individual brainwaves can actually start to synchronize, creating a powerful, shared sense of altered consciousness. Being part of a group exposes you to new ideas. Different traditions and perspectives can challenge your own and foster continuous growth. A coven provides immediate accountability for your practice, ensuring you actually do the work that you intended. Plus, shared failures are easier to cope with and learn from. And celebrating the Sabbats is just a lot more fun when you have friends around to share that harvest stew or to gather with around the Yule log. It embeds your practice into a social context which satisfies that innate human need for belonging. So where do you find a like-minded community, especially if you lean on the skeptical side? Here are a few spaces that cater to the modern, science-minded, and non-theistic witch. The first is the SAS community. Look for groups or discussions centered around skeptical, agnostic, atheist, and science-seeking witchcraft. These spaces are explicitly for those who approach the craft with a critical and evidence-based mindset. You could try atheopaganism. This is a very specific path that is firmly grounded in science and observable evidence. It rejects supernatural entities like gods or ghosts, and the atheopagan community often has a very structured philosophical approach based on reverence for the observable universe. Another easy place to start is online forums and in social media. You could try an online community like a subreddit. Or other online spaces like Discord servers and Facebook groups have channels that are specifically dedicated to the intersection of science and spirituality. You could search for podcasts that value science in their practice. If you're interested in atheopaganism, look up the podcast The Wonder. Another place to look is a universalist or an eclectic group. Some local pagan groups are intentionally inclusive, and they don't require belief in a specific deity, and instead they'll focus on themes like nature or psychology. These may include theists, atheists, agnostics, all focusing on a shared ritual experience. And this can be a fantastic way to experience community ritual while you still get to bring your own interpretation to the table. All right, this wouldn't be an episode of Atheist Witch Podcast if I didn't take a quick aside to talk about something tough, right? We need to talk about red flags, especially in groups that operate with high spiritual authority like some covens do. Even for an atheist witch, toxic group dynamics are a real threat, and I want you to be wary of any community that practices any kind of exclusionary or hate-based practice. This is really, unfortunately, a dark corner of the pagan community, specifically in groups that practice Folkism, which is an exclusionary form of paganism based on ancestry or race. Any group that promotes racism, white supremacy, or dictates who is worthy of a spiritual path based on their skin color or ethnic heritage is immediately dangerous and incompatible with a modern humanistic and critically minded practice. True witchcraft and reverence for the natural world are universal concepts, and these hate-based ideologies have no place in a healthy evidence-based community. Furthermore, when you're searching for your community, especially online, look for signs of intersectional awareness. A healthy, modern coven or group does not just reject hate, it actively cultivates a space that is queer-affirming, accessible to witches with disabilities, respectful to the sources of their traditions. If you see a group using closed practices or promoting cultural appropriation without attribution, that's another sign of shallow ethics, and they may not align with your more thoughtful humanist path. Avoid any coven or group that demands absolute secrecy or loyalty. Healthy boundaries allow you to discuss your practice. If that group is wanting to isolate you from outside friends or family or requires unquestioning obedience to a leader, walk away. Avoid a group that has excessive financial demands. Contributions for supplies are fine, but be cautious of groups that pressure you to pay any exorbitant fees for simple teachings or rituals. Avoid groups that encourage separation from critical thought. If you are ever told to just believe and stop asking logical questions, that is a massive red flag for a science-minded witch. Your skepticism is your anchor. Don't let someone talk you out of it, and you always have the right to question. I feel like this goes without saying, but please avoid any groups that have a charismatic but untouchable leader. That's called a cult. If the high priestess or leader is never questioned, never wrong, or uses their spiritual power to manipulate or mistreat members, that is an immediate sign of a toxic dynamic. Walk away. And this one might be controversial, but as most pagans often have a fairly open view on sexuality, including sexuality and magic, it's a personal red flag for me if kids are involved in the coven. I'm not talking about with Sabbath celebrations and meals. This is more if minors are either allowed or expected in the circle during rituals. All right, let's back up and talk about some practical advice here. If you're like me, you will find yourself balancing the solitary need for authenticity with the very human need for connection and community. So here is the practical advice for having the best of both worlds. First of all, you can form a coven of correspondents. You don't need to meet physically. You could find 2 or 3 trusted, like-minded witches, like a fellow atheist or sass witch, online and create a private group chat. This could be a space for sharing research, checking in on each other's practice, or offering advice. It can provide accountability and external perspective of a coven without the rigid meeting schedule. You could create a shared book of shadows. You could collaborate on a digital or physical book of shared shadows. This is where you pool your collective evidence-based research on correspondences, herbalism, psychological interpretations of divination, whatever you want. It becomes a secular, crowdsourced text that's far more comprehensive than what you might create alone. And for major festivals, you could even organize a quick video call. Have everyone light a candle, share one thing that they're grateful for at Mabon, or one intention for the season at Ostara, and then close the call. It satisfies that communal urge without demanding a massive, highly choreographed ritual. If you're lucky and you find a local group that is mostly theistic but welcoming, here's how you can participate authentically as an atheist. Focus on the archetype, not the deity. So when the group invokes a goddess, say the maiden, interpret this figure psychologically. For you, the goddess isn't a deity, but the powerful archetype of new beginnings, untapped potential, or creative spark. You can still address the energy and themes of the moment without compromising your non-theistic stance. You can use scientific terminology. Instead of talking about raising power or channeling energy, you can use language for yourself that resonates with your worldview. When the group is chanting, you can focus on communal intention setting, harnessing collective cognitive momentum, or achieving a flow state. You're doing the same work, you're just labeling it more honestly for yourself. And don't lose sight of participating in the mundane. Community doesn't always have to be about ritual. It can be about the potluck, the conversation, the cleanup, the book exchange. Little acts of service and bonding are incredibly important and purely secular forms of community magic. Here's a message I received recently that actually inspired this episode, and I think a lot of you will relate to this. Hey, Atheist Witch, I've been solitary for about 5 years now, mainly because I just can't find a group that doesn't focus heavily on deities. I tried joining a local pagan meetup, and while they were super nice, I felt like a fraud when they were raising energy for the god and goddess. My biggest struggle isn't finding people, it's finding people I don't feel like I have to constantly edit my beliefs for. It just feels easier to stick to my quiet corner than to navigate that philosophical difference in person. That really hits home, doesn't it? That feeling of philosophical exhaustion is real, and that's why establishing low commitment and high trust connections is often the best solution for the skeptical witch. And even if you decide to practice solo most of the time, you might still want to participate in certain communal rituals, and vice versa. For example, for your daily work or shadow work, that might be best kept solo. Deep introspection, grounding, centering, and subconscious digging around don't require an audience. That's about developing your internal locus of self-control and self-reliance. But on the other hand, for a Sabbath celebration, this is where community really shines. While an atheist witch's personal Sabbath ritual might be a quiet candle spell or a garden planning session, a community gathering turns it into a big celebration. That can be a wonderful opportunity to reinforce social bonds, share in the gratitude of the season. And what about celebrating moon phases? These are adaptable either way. You can join a virtual meeting for a shared intention setting ritual on the new moon, but you can keep your own emotional release and divination work solitary during the dark or the full moon. Before we sign off, I want to issue a quick challenge to all of you listeners. If you are a longtime lone wolf, I challenge you to join just one low-commitment online SaaS discussion or virtual check-in this week. If you're used to group work, I want you to try taking a key component of your communal ritual and practice it completely alone with zero input for others for like 3 days. Tell me what felt different about this change to your practice. Was the group element distracting, or did it enhance your cognitive focus? Ultimately, the choice is always yours. There is no right way to be a witch, only the most authentic way for you. Whether you thrive in a coven, seek comfort in strong online community, or find your deepest power in the quiet solitude of your personal altar, keep leaning into what helps you grow and truly live your intentional, scientific, magical life. That's all for today's episode on solitary versus community witchcraft. I hope this deep dive gave you some practical ideas on finding your tribe or forging your own path in the modern craft. Join me in 2 weeks for our next episode, Cycles of Our World, and keep an eye out for the final bonus episode of the year about Yule. You can find links to some of the SAS and Atheo-Pagan resources I mentioned today in the show notes. As always, please reach out to me with your questions and comments. I absolutely love to hear from you. You can email me at anatheistwitch@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at anatheistwitch. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep making your own magic.